Welcome back to the deep dive. Ever stop and think about the really big forces shaping things, stuff that goes way beyond the daily news cycle? Not just what you buy, but like the stability of whole countries, the flow of power around the globe. Today, we're digging into two really powerful and honestly fundamentally connected things: trade and diplomacy. So our mission here is to kind of unpack how these two have shaped nations, I mean, for centuries, right?
Yeah.
And how they're still reshaping things today. We're going to pull out the key ideas, the core insights from the material we've looked at, give you the big picture fast without getting lost in the weeds. You'll get the essentials quick.
It really is striking, isn't it, how you just can't separate them. Trade, at its heart, it's about economic growth, getting access to goods, resources. It basically sets a nation's standard of living. But then diplomacy. That's the whole art and science of managing the relationships between countries.
Building trust.
Yeah, solving conflicts or stopping them before they start. And, crucially, opening doors for working together. They really feed off each other. It's the absolute backbone of how countries interact. It shapes everything from, huge peace treaties down to the tiny details of economic policy.
That's a great way to put it, the backbone.
Okay.
So to really get a handle on today, we need to look back, right?
Yeah.
This isn't new. Commerce and diplomacy, they've always gone together. Think about the Silk Road. That wasn't just a road, was it? It was this huge network that only worked because of all these delicate diplomatic deals between empires, different groups.
Yeah.
Or the age of exploration. That started as discovery, sure, but it pretty quickly turned into building these massive colonial trade empires. And every bit of that was built on treaties, sometimes forced, sometimes negotiated.
Right.
Even way back, ancient Egyptians, Persians, Chinese, Greeks.
Yeah.
They weren't just fighting wars. They were constantly sending envoys out, negotiating trade terms, trying to lock down resources, making alliances.
Yeah, securing those supply lines, essentially.
Exactly. And those big medieval trading cities, Venice, Constantinople, they got rich because they were good at the diplomatic game, securing agreements with powerful neighbors.
And if you follow that thread, you eventually hit a really key moment. The Treaty of Westphalia, 1648.
Okay.
It wasn't just ending a horrible war in Europe. It basically laid down the blueprint for the modern nation-state system. It established this core idea of sovereignty.
Sovereignty, right. The idea that a state controls its own territory.
Precisely. And that concept became absolutely critical. It created the framework, the basic rules for how sovereign states could negotiate trade deals with each other, how diplomacy would even work on the world stage, who gets to talk to whom, under what rules. It really set the stage.
Absolutely. And knowing that history makes how diplomacy works today to grease the wheels of trade even more interesting. It's way more than just handshakes and photo walks. It has these really vital, practical jobs. Let's start with negotiating trade agreements. These deals, they're not just legal documents. They're super complex frameworks trying to balance a country's economic interests with global standards on everything. Supply chains, digital stuff.
The environment, labor.
Exactly. You see it in big deals like USMCA or all the EU agreements or that massive RCEP deal in Asia. Every single part, tariffs, quotas, worker rights, environmental rules, how to solve disputes later, it's all hammered out through long, tough diplomatic talks.
Hard bargaining.
Yeah. Then there's the constant diplomatic push to lower trade barriers. This is an ongoing thing against protectionism, Super high tariffs, import bans, or sneaky regulations designed to keep foreign goods out.
Subtle barriers can be just as effective sometimes.
Right. Think about all those negotiating rounds at the World Trade Organization, the WTO. I know its dispute system has issues now, but historically, those forums were prime examples of global diplomacy trying to liberalize trade.
Definitely the central forum for a long time.
And crucially, diplomacy is what keeps trade disputes from blowing up when things get tense, like the U.S. China trade issues.
Which seem constant.
Yeah. Or all the Brexit fallout. These things can seriously damage relationships and mess with the economy. Diplomacy steps in, tries to mediate, stop things escalating.
It can be anything from quiet back-channel talks to formal arbitration panels.
The goal is stopping economic friction turning into something much nastier.
Vital.
And then there's just the day-to-day work of promoting national interests overseas. Embassies, consulates.
The boots on the ground diplomacy.
Yeah. They're not just stamping passports. They're actively pushing their country's exports, trying to lure foreign investment, helping out their own companies abroad, all critical for economic health.
Absolutely. Protecting those businesses is key.
And here's something maybe less obvious, but really powerful. Using trade as geopolitical leverage.
Yeah. This is where it gets really strategic.
Exactly. Trade becomes a direct tool of diplomacy. You can reward allies with better trade terms, or you can squeeze adversaries.
We see that with sanctions, right?
For sure. Economic sanctions, specific export controls on sensitive tech, or even aid that's tied to trade deals. It's a strong, sometimes hidden part of the diplomatic toolbox.
And it's worth stressing why each of these roles matters so much. When diplomats hash out a trade deal, it's not just numbers on a page. They're literally shaping industries, impacting jobs back home, affecting what things cost for you, the consumer, even shifting strategic alliances between countries.
Right.
When they step in to mediate a trade fight, they're trying to prevent huge economic shocks, keep supply chains running, maintain some kind of global stability, which is pretty fragile.
Definitely feels fragile sometimes.
And using trade as leverage, that's not just about putting pressure on someone, it's strategically trying to shift power balances, maybe even forcing a rethink of entire global supply chains to gain an edge. It just shows you the layers, the real complexity behind every diplomatic move involving trade.
Given all that complexity, maybe we should talk about the big players, the institutions that try to govern this whole thing. When you talk global trade and diplomacy, a few names always pop up. We don't need to define them from scratch, but understanding what they do in this mix is important.
Sure.
So, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, even with its current struggles, with getting everyone to agree, it's still the main place for multi-country trade talks and sorting out disputes. The main rule setter.
Theoretically, yes. The main multilateral body.
Then you've got UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. They often focus on developing countries, trying to make sure trade policies are fair and actually help poorer economies get a foothold in the global system.
An important voice for inclusivity.
And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, it plays a huge role stabilizing economies, supporting policies that actually enable trade, often steps in during financial crises that could otherwise spread everywhere.
Financial stability underpins everything, really.
The World Bank. They fund big infrastructure projects, ports, roads, communications, basically building the physical connections needed for trade and economic integration, literally paving the way.
Connecting markets.
Yeah. And beyond the global giants, you have these powerful regional groups. ASEAN in Southeast Asia, the EU in Europe, Mercosur down in South America, the African Union.
Right, operating at a different scale.
And they all negotiate their own specific, sometimes really ambitious, regional trade deals. These can even act as testing grounds for bigger global agreements later.
What's really interesting about all these institutions, even though they have different jobs, some focus on rules, some on development, and some on regions together, they kind of create the whole structure for international trade and diplomacy.
They provide the framework.
Exactly. The platforms, the agreed-upon rules, often the money needed for countries to interact economically in a, well, somewhat organized way. It's contentious sometimes, sure, but imagine the chaos without them. Their existence gives a level of predictability you just wouldn't have otherwise.
Okay, so that's the history and the institutions. What about right now? What does this all mean in today's world, which seems to change so fast? The dynamics aren't fixed, right? They're always shifting, new challenges, new chances. One huge factor is just how globalized and interdependent we are. Supply chains stretching across the entire planet, which means diplomatic relations aren't just nice to have. They are essential for things to run smoothly.
Absolutely critical.
We saw that so clearly during the COVID pandemic, didn't we? Diplomatic failures or successes directly affected whether essential goods could move or not. It really showed how fragile that interconnectedness can be.
A real stress test for the system.
And then there's technology. The relentless march of tech and the explosion of digital trade. This is a massive new area for trade diplomacy. Suddenly, things like data privacy, rules for e-commerce across borders, cybersecurity, protecting intellectual property online. These are front and center in trade talks.
Totally new territory in many ways.
Any new trade deal basically has to grapple with the digital economy now, and that's where national laws often really clash.
Big time. And then there's climate.
Right, the shift towards climate and sustainable trade. The diplomatic focus is moving towards green trade. That means wrestling with tricky stuff like carbon border taxes, putting environmental clauses right into trade agreements, funding sustainable infrastructure.
It adds whole new layers of complexity and potential friction points.
Definitely. And we also see this constant tension, this push and pull between economic nationalism and multilateralism.
Yeah, that's a big one playing out globally.
On one side, you have countries wanting more protectionism, self-sufficiency, bring jobs back home. On the other, lots of countries are still pushing for open markets, global cooperation, arguing that's the only way everyone benefits. So trade diplomacy today is always doing this balancing act. Domestic politics versus international commitments. It's tricky.
Very tricky.
And finally, there's this clear rise of geoeconomics, where trade is openly used as a strategic weapon, basically, tied up with security goals.
It's not just about economics anymore.
No. Think about China's Belt and Road Initiative. Huge infrastructure investments, yes, but it's also about projecting influence, securing strategic routes,
Extending reach.
or how the U.S. uses very specific export controls on things like semiconductors to manage its technological lead. That's not just trade policy, it's strategic statecraft, using trade tools.
And all these modern dynamics taken together, they absolutely make the connection between trade and diplomacy even more complicated and, frankly, even more critical than before. The speed of tech change, the sheer urgency of climate change, the shifting global power balance. It all demands incredible adaptability, really nuanced understanding from diplomats, from policymakers. It's not just about moving boxes of stuff anymore. It's about data flows, carbon footprints, strategic advantage in a world that's hyper-connected and changing constantly. The stakes just feel higher. The need for smart, agile diplomacy is greater than ever.
Okay, let's make this even more real. Let's look at some specific examples, some case studies that show these ideas in action. First, maybe the obvious one, U.S. China trade relations.
Can't avoid that one.
Right, it's like a permanent case study in complexity. This constant mix of fierce competition, but also sometimes pragmatic cooperation.
A real roller coaster.
Yeah, issues like tariffs, IP theft concerns, market access that keep coming back, needing constant, really high-stakes diplomatic effort just to manage the relationship, shows you just how much persistence is needed.
Absolutely. Day in, day out.
Then think about the European Union's trade policy. The EU is really interesting because it consciously uses its trade deals, and it has a lot of them to push its values.
Yeah, they try to export their standards.
Exactly. Things like human rights, tough environmental rules, labor laws, they build it into the agreements. It's a clear example of using trade for broader goals, but a value-driven diplomacy.
Using market access as leverage for those values.
Third, let's look at Africa. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, FCFTA. This is a huge diplomatic achievement, really ambitious.
Massive potential.
It aims to completely change the continent's economy by boosting trade within Africa, cutting reliance on foreign markets, and strengthening the whole continent's unity and bargaining power.
A huge diplomatic lift to get that agreed upon.
Totally. Built entirely on getting all those countries on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a less obvious example, but powerful. The Abraham Accords in the Middle East.
Ah, yes. Interesting case.
These weren't just peace deals. What's really striking is how quickly they opened up significant economic and diplomatic ties between Israel and several Arab nations.
Yeah, the economic aspect was key.
It really shows how trade, even in regions with deep historical tensions, can be this surprising catalyst. It can actually reshape dynamics, build new relationships where politics alone was stuck.
Economic pragmatism breaking through political barriers. In each of these cases, they really show how the theory plays out in the real world, right? They give different perspectives. U.S. China shows that constant negotiation tightrope in a competitive relationship. The EU shows how you can leverage trade for wider goals, ethical or political. FCFTA highlights the amazing potential of regional integration for empowerment and unity if they can make it work fully.
Right.
And the Abraham Accords really drive home how economic links can sometimes be the key, the bridge to diplomatic breakthroughs, even where history is really difficult. They make you think about all the different reasons countries engage and the complex results you get.
So looking forward then, what's on the horizon? What's coming next for trade and diplomacy? The future seems like it'll be shaped by some really big, game-changing factors.
No doubt.
Like artificial intelligence and automation. They're set to completely shake up labor markets globally, change how things are made, how they're traded.
Big disruptions coming there.
Climate change, too. It's going to increasingly affect where resources are, what food can be grown and traded, maybe even change shipping routes as ice melts or water levels change. That creates whole new geopolitical pressures.
Resource scarcity is a classic driver of conflict, unfortunately.
Yeah. And we're seeing global power shift, right? The rise of China, the increasing influence of the global south. It demands a more multipolar approach to trade talks, challenging the old ways of doing things.
The old order is definitely changing.
And then there's digital currencies, blockchain. They're already starting to change how money moves across borders. That raises all sorts of new questions about regulation, control, trust.
Huge questions for governments and central banks, which really brings up a critical point for all of us, doesn't it? Facing these massive linked changes, tech revolutions, climate crisis, shifting power, the need for real, sustained multilateral cooperation just can't be stressed enough.
We have to work together.
Exactly. Making sure the benefits of trade get shared fairly, widely, while trying to minimize conflict, minimize inequality. It all comes down to our collective ability to adapt, to innovate, and to actually cooperate on a global scale. It's a huge challenge, but maybe also a huge opportunity for positive change if we get it right.
So wrapping up this deep dive, I hope it's crystal clear that trade and diplomacy are just completely intertwined, always have been. They're not just tools. They're like the fundamental architects of how the world engages. When they're managed well, with wisdom and real understanding, they create incredible prosperity, they strengthen peace, they build bridges between nations. But if they're misused or ignored or just driven by narrow self-interest, they can fuel mistrust really fast, cause economic chaos, and even lead to conflict.
The stakes are high.
They really are. So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given this incredibly complex web of global trade and diplomacy and how fast tech and the environment are changing, what kind of truly new, maybe innovative ways of doing diplomacy might we actually need to ensure a future that's genuinely fair and peaceful for everyone?
It's a critical question. The urgency right now is palpable. In a world changing this fast, the need for really skilled diplomats, for transparent policies, for genuinely fair trade practices, it's never been more vital. We just encourage you to keep seeking out different sources of information, different perspective, to really get your head around these forces shaping all of our futures.